Unit 5. So I know that so far we've given you a lot of tips and tools on how to help your facilitation and your work with groups move smoothly, but it isn't always going to be that easy. Sometimes there are tensions or sometimes there can be hurt feelings. So we want to give you some tools to work through those types of situations as well. So in this unit, we're going to talk about how you can raise those issues. And so we're going to talk about interventions. We're going to go through the definition, how to decide whether or when to intervene, using specific language, intervention language that you can use to help, the steps, and also how that can play out when dealing with conflict. And then we'll do some practice also. So before we get started, when you hear the word intervention, what comes up for you?
Stepping in to not, I don't want to say intervene, but stepping in to kind of change the course of things.
Yeah, stepping in is a great way to describe it.
Yeah, kind of making a choice. Kind of like here, how should we move forward?
Sure, like here's the point you're at, where do we go from here? Absolutely. So our definition is that it's a process that you use to show the group a picture of its current state of behavior or efficiency, and then you can provide the group with a choice on whether or how to improve the group's functioning. I like your visual. You've come to this place, and now where do we go? So sometimes it can be hard to decide, well, when would I intervene? What types of scenarios would occur that would lead me to intervening? And so here we've listed just a couple of them. One of them could be if people aren't listening to each other. You know, it's really hard to have a conversation when people are kind of talking at each other and not really hearing what each other are saying. Also, if there are side conversations, can be very distracting. If people are interrupting each other, sometimes people can also be kind of sarcastic or disrespectful in tone, which can negatively impact relationships that you're trying to build as a community. Or if the discussion is off track. There's also the question of whether to intervene or not. You can notice some of these things happening, but should I say something? Should I do something? I don't know. So here's some questions you can ask yourself. Is the problem serious? Might it go away on its own? How much time will intervening take? You know, do you have 20 minutes to talk total? And so intervening, you know, would get in the way of that. How much disruption would intervening cause? How will intervening affect the relationships or hurt the climate? You know, always, as we've been talking about earlier today, we're always thinking about the relationships. And sometimes intervening can maybe feel like this would hurt the relationships. Sometimes it could feel like this could really help the relationships. And it's a judgment call. What are the chances the intervention can work? But also, what happens if I do nothing? So if you go, please, to page 20 in your participant guide, and you'll notice that there are some sample phrases that you can use when you're intervening. And I'll give you just a second to look over those. So what are some of the things that you notice about these phrases? What do they have in common?
There's some I statements there for starters. You know, I'm noticing, I'm concerned that, things like that.
Okay.
It's also pointing out what's being observed.
Yeah.
The behavior.
Right. What's the observation? Exactly. And so some of these phrases are helpful because when you're raising these things, when you're giving the group a picture of what's going on and then therefore a choice on what to do about it, you want them to react to the observation. You don't want them to react to you. And so that's why sometimes language can be challenging. So now that you know when to intervene, let's talk about how you do it. And we have 3 steps to it. And I'll just highlight now that sometimes step 1 and step 3 are really easy for us, but we forget about step 2. So we'll talk more about that when I get there. So step 1 is to describe what you're seeing. You don't attribute motive and you're non-judgmental. So an example that we sometimes use is if, you know, I may say, hey, Alan, I've noticed that every time Doug speaks, you push your chair back from the table and disengage from the conversation. or it appears that you disengage from the conversation. So that's just describing what I'm seeing. I'm not saying why he does it, because I don't know. That's the thing, I don't know. This is what I'm seeing. Step 2 is the impact statement. So based on the observations you've made, share the impact that that person's behavior is having either on you, on others, or on the whole group. So Alan, when you push your chair back, I've noticed that Doug hasn't been sharing as many contributions. And it's also making me a little bit curious about what's going on. Step 3 is to invite members' suggestions, so the group, of what to do, or you can make your own request. So in that case, I might say, hey, Alan, can you help me understand what's going on for you? So you're getting to the bottom of what's going on for him. Or you may say, as a group, how do we want to manage our participation? So I said I would go back to step 2. And the thing about step 2 is that impact statement. And what you're doing here is you're looking at behavior. And whenever you're changing behavior, as an individual, you only change because you know why and you feel why. So a lot of times if someone says, hey, I'm noticing that you're doing this, I want you to do that. You can say, okay, but do you really feel why? And this impact statement helps people feel the why of the request, or the why that the impact that particular behavior is having, and has a better than success rate of that change. Okay, now that we've gone over the 3 steps, I just want to ask you how does this feel for you? How are you reacting to this?
Yeah, I could see some people having trouble maybe calling somebody out like this.
Mm-hmm.
Have you experienced that, or?
Yeah, it's certainly, it can be very uncomfortable, and I think it depends a lot on your own personal comfort with taking some of these steps. It also depends on your comfort with the group. And some people handle this in a number of different ways. Some people just want to handle it outside the room, right? Just take a time out and go talk to Alan outside the room and say, hey, Alan, I'm noticing this, what's going on? And that's certainly one way to handle it. And the thing is as we're talking about this, as we may have mentioned earlier, you want to be your most authentic self. So even with these tips and tools, try them out for now, practice them, and when you're in the moment, you're going to feel most how it's going to be right for you. One thing I do want to highlight is that I do believe, especially with group formation, if the goal here, as we've been talking about, is to build relationships throughout the community and to keep those relationships strong and going, you'll have already created some of those sample norms we talked about earlier, and maybe some of those norms talk about how you're going to raise issues as a group. But sometimes too, let's say if that situation between Doug and Alan were happening in the room, and you just talked to Alan in the hallway, Doug doesn't necessarily know that you did that. Doug still may feel the impact of Alan's behaviors. And the other members of the group also don't know that that happened. Maybe Alan said, oh man, I didn't realize I was doing that. I can really see how that would be bothering everyone. And then he comes back in the room ready to move forward, but everyone else at the table is still impacted by thinking that Alan is just being rude or disrespectful. And so calling it out as a group and trying to use the observations, kind of, as I like to say, direct kindness. You're being direct, you're not fluffing it, but you're also being kind and curious, can help the group to grow together. So next, let's move into our activity.